for who's out there today. I think we have a good crowd.
Yeah, do. And well, maybe they don't see the poll. Nobody's answered it. Well, I guess that's that. Uh, okay, well, why don't we continue on? Maybe some people will answer it in a second.
Sure, fine. Didn't ask any real tough questions like what is your company doing about DEI?
Yeah.
I thought we'd leave that to your own self. Okay. I have the questionnaire in front of me here. How do I get rid of that?
Oh, I'll get rid of it.
Excellent. Okay.
Okay.
So here we go. And we're really talking about a lot of executive orders. I think we're up to like, I don't know, 65 or maybe 70 by now. And the ones that deal with DEI, you might be surprised to see that there are several that touch upon higher education. I did a program with Blake last week on higher ed. You've got 14173, which is really our focus today. And then federal contractors also have not only 14173, but 170 as well, and then several that pertain to federal employees. So 173, notice the word, this is so important for those of you out there who are not either federal contractors or are not, if you're in the nonprofit arena, grantees. Now, if you're in the nonprofit arena, it's very, very unusual that you're not getting some federal money. So you're going to be treated like a federal contractor. In the private sector, there are a couple 100,000 federal contractors. So there are a lot of companies out there, and you may be one of them, that doesn't do any business with the federal government. An executive order is not a regulation. That's something that's very important to emphasize here. And therefore, the president can, through an executive order, impact directly what government contractors can and cannot do. For the rest of the private sector, he can only encourage, and that's what he's doing here, is encouraging the agencies. Those are the heads of agencies. We're talking about his cabinet secretaries. We're talking about people somewhat below that level at the various the federal departments and agencies that make up this kind of massive bureaucracy that he's going after. So he's asking the attorney general and the heads of the agencies to advance the private sector, the policy of individual initiative, excellence, and hard work. Now, they have about 120 days, if I'm not mistaken, to report to the attorney general how they intend to advance those qualities or those attributes that they're interested in. But my point here is the executive order for those non-grantees, non-contracting folks out there, and it's to encourage you at this point. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to come along with regulations. I think they most certainly are as early in the future as they possibly can. But for right now, that's all it is. As for 170, each of those agencies working with the Office of Personnel Management, working with OMB, have 120 days from January 20th to put forward a plan as to how they are going to ensure that federal contractors, that the requirements in the contracts are such that they're going to achieve the goals that Trump and his administration say they want to accomplish. So that's basically where we are as of today. Couple of major points here. I've already hinted at one. All of the laws, federal and state, involving anti-discrimination are all still in place. None of them have changed as a result of these executive orders that I just had on the screen or any of the other 65 or 70 executive orders that exist right now. The same thing is true for the states. 48 of the 50 states have the full panoply, the full buffet of anti-discrimination laws that more or less mirror what the federal government has in place. All of those up above, the 5 or 6 bullet points up above. 21 states protect sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, I'm sure you know that that's in particular, Trump is going after transgender and sexual preference, sexual orientation. And 21 states, for example, New Jersey has a law against discrimination. I worked in New Jersey for decades. And for all of those decades, the state of New Jersey protected sexual orientation and gender identification. And you even have probably the same 21 states. They're probably mostly all blue states. Also have Crown Acts. Those deal with personal appearance, particularly hairstyles, but most of them cover other areas of personal appearance. And all of the regulations that enforce and operationalize these statutes are also still in place. They are not impacted directly by these executive orders. Then we have all of the litigation that's going on. So just less than a week ago, a federal judge in the district court in Maryland put a national hold on 14137, the executive order that we're particularly interested in talking about today involving DEI. And this is kind of fascinating because, first of all, it's always astonished me that you could have a federal judge in a little state like Maryland issue an order and say this covers the entire nation. And judges don't always do that. Sometimes they only apply their court order to the litigants in front of them. Sometimes it's just to a limited group of other people in the state or in the district or what have you. And there's been a lot of debate about whether these nationwide bans even are enforceable. I'm sure you've heard that the Trump administration and the DOJ are ignoring some of the federal injunctions that have been issued against them. Some of that is certainly creating the potential for a constitutional crisis and is probably contempt of the court. Some of it really may go to this notion of national ban and whether these national bans really ought to be given the kind of credence that they have in the past. So we'll see how that plays out. I certainly have heard just yesterday, the Supreme Court Chief Justice Roberts said that the USAID money that's been held up, and there was a judge, I think out on the West Coast somewhere, who issued a national ban and said that money needs to be released. Now Roberts has issued an order saying that money is going to stay precisely where it is. And I don't think that's so much of an indication that he supports Trump on this, as it is an indication that the Supreme Court wants to get their hands on these cases as quickly as possible and give a definitive ruling. And in the meantime, he wants all of the money left precisely where it is until he gets that opportunity. In the case in Maryland, it looks like there were some constitutional issues that came up in that case, that these mandates, these executive orders are just too vague. They violate the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. How do you know whether you're violating the law if you don't know what the law says? And then what about the First Amendment and my right to speak as I will? As for you nonprofits out there, there's a whole stream of litigation going on right now that could directly affect you. The most important case to keep an eye on is National Urban League versus Trump, which is in front of the district court for the District of Columbia right now. And they are making an argument, the various nonprofits in that lawsuit as plaintiffs. We respectfully ask the court to uphold their constitutional rights so they may continue their important, urgent, and mission-driven work of supporting and providing services to the marginalized and underserved communities who are directly and intentionally targeted, maligned, and disadvantaged by these executive orders. So if your mission is such that you feel you are representing individuals or groups of individuals that are being damaged by these executive orders, this Urban League case may be a very important case for you to be wanting to keep an eye on. Federal contractors. So if you have a federal contract or a grant, and again, I would be very surprised if you're a nonprofit out there listening today and you don't have some kind of grants or other federal money coming in, you're going to be asked to certify that you're not violating any of these DEI executive orders. I wouldn't want to be the individual who is making that certification to the federal government right now, precisely because of what the Maryland court said here about the vagueness of these executive orders. Because I could very well think that we have responded and we are not doing anything that offends the notion, the administration's notion of DEI. But can I really be sure we're not? Few things we know probably for sure. One is you're probably not going to be filing an affirmative action report anytime soon. Now, Trump did not do anything as far as affirmative action for veterans or the disabled is concerned. Therefore, you may be filing some sort of a modified affirmative action report. The EEOC, I suppose, is going to let us know what that's going to be in the future. Right now, we can only hold our breath and guess, but certainly the full-blown port to starboard affirmative action report, I think that's a dead letter, at least as long as the Trump administration is in power. As far as disabled and veterans, nothing has really changed as yet. So whatever affirmative action you're engaged in, and certainly if you're a federal contractor, you're doing something for veterans, I would be sure, and disabled, nothing in that regard has been touched. The penalties, and as I say, I'd be very chary about certifying that I'm not violating any of these several DEI executive orders. As Trump has said, it's going to be dealt with under the False Claim Act. This is an act that has a lot of teeth. So every violation. So for instance, let's say you're a healthcare provider and you are billing for services or products that you're not entitled to bill Medicare or Medicaid for. Each one of those billing items becomes a violation with a minimum $14,000, maximum $28,000 penalty connected with that, plus triple damages for whatever the government can show were its losses as a result of the violation. So when you think about that, you realize that there's some real skin in the game here for federal contractors as far as this whole certification requirement is concerned. And don't forget, we also have these key TAM actions where an individual, someone, you fire your DEI officer and she decides to file a key TAM action because you violated a federal contract in some way. Something of that sort, all kinds of permutations come up under the False Claims Act that should cause us to take a step back and say, before we go signing off on anything, we really need to work with our contracting officers to figure out, where does that agency stand? What does this language mean? How are you going to enforce that language if I sign this contract? The EEOC,
Jim, let me jump in for 1 second.
Sure.
If anybody has any questions, put them in the Q&A. Also, we have the resources available. So this slideshow, should you need it, is available on the resources tab at the bottom, so you can download it. Thank you.
I think we've posted the fact sheet on the executive order, which kind of summarizes the bigger pieces of it. One of the bigger pieces, by the way, is the abrogation of Executive Order 11246. 11246 has been supplemented both to give more rights and to take away some rights to give more freedom to federal contractors, depending on whether you have a Republican or a Democratic administration. But 11246 has survived since I want to say Kennedy, but it's probably Johnson who signed that executive order some 60 years ago. And now it's just been tossed. The first time the president hasn't said, okay, I'm going to supplement it, I'm going to add or subtract something from it, but has left it there. That's gone now, which is kind of an indicator of just how sweeping the efforts are in regard to this DEI I should say DEI initiative by the Trump administration. So let's look at the EEOC. So the first thing you would find if you went on their website is they've dismissed all the gender identity discrimination cases that they were handling. Number two, they've rescinded previous guidance involving LGBTQ employees. And now they are emphasizing biological and binary reality of sex. Health and Human Services has done that as well. And OSHA also has adopted this binary gender designation. One of the big, most notable things that OSHA did was remove the 2015 restroom guidance. And so what I'm finding when I Google around the federal government is a lot of places where even in other webinars, for example, I would have a URL to some of these things, put that URL in, and I'm getting a screen that comes up and said, this page cannot be found, or this page is no longer available, or this page has been archived. So the restroom guidance is gone from OSHA, and they have adopted this binary gender designation. Let's talk about attorneys general. This is something maybe I'm going to venture that you haven't given a lot of thought to, but you really should. So 23 jurisdictions, including the District of Columbia, have Democrat attorneys general. So that means 28 jurisdictions have Republicans. And the attorney general of a state has enormous power. In some areas, I would argue almost more power than the governor. And a lot of these AGs are elected officials. So the governor may be of a different party, may not like what the AG is doing, has only limited ability to control them. And we are seeing some real high levels of activity occurring among attorneys general right now. On the Democrat side, we are seeing efforts to foster more or preserve DEI as best they can. Sometimes they have statutory or regulatory assistance with that in some of the bluer states. In other states, maybe not so much, but they are in a situation where they can create a lot of pushback at the state level. What can they do? Well, first of all, they can do exactly what Trump is doing, and that is they can encourage, or encouragement is always kind of a crypto word for threaten. If the person who's encouraging you has power, if your old man encouraged you to be in by 11 o'clock at night when you were in high school, you know what that encouragement really meant. You're not going to get the old man's car keys again if you're not in by maybe 10:45 would be nice. Same thing with these attorneys general. So they are, for example, Walmart has got a letter that was signed by it, and that's another point. They often work together. So you may find out that a dozen of these folks have initiated a lawsuit together from various states, or they have sent a letter. And so they have been encouraging companies like Walmart, which has stepped back from its DEI program. And I think, there's a lot of that going on. I'm not making the foolish assumption that everybody out there listening to me today is saying, oh, how can I save my DEI program? I appreciate the fact that, frankly, after many, many years as an administrator in higher education, mostly we worked with the Department of Ed, but it was kind of the same thing. There were a lot of expenses, a lot of responsibilities, even things that got us into lawsuits under Title IX, for example, when we would expel a student because he was found more likely than not to be guilty of sexual assault. And then we get sued by the kid and his father or mother, who's inevitably an attorney. I can certainly understand how you might have negative feelings about DEI. My own wife, rest her soul, when she was a teacher, they had mandatory DEI training in their school district too, and many of them felt insulted because they felt that they were doing a great job of dealing with their kids. She taught in a very, very diverse and a lot of poverty as well as diversity in her school district, and she did a great job with her children of color and her children who were recent immigrants, and on and on and on. And then kind of being told almost like communist re-education, well, you really don't understand us. You don't understand the way we think and we feel and what our grievances are. And so you're going to come to this DEI meeting and you're going to fess up to the things that you don't know and the things you're doing wrong. I can appreciate all of those reasons having to have at our little university, it was always strapped for cash, having to have a vice president for DEI, having to have another administrator for Title IX, sexual assault cases, et cetera, et cetera. Certainly don't want to suggest that I'm either surprised or offended that some of your organizations took the opportunity from Mr. Trump to actually step back from DEI. But you may be in a blue state where you're going to get some pushback from the AG of that state if it happens to be a Democrat. If you are in a red state and you want to continue with DEI, be watching over your shoulder, not only for Uncle Sam coming down the trail after you, but possibly the Attorney General of your state, and in states like Ron DeSantis's Florida, the governor as well. For those of you who have Democrat attorneys general and are interested in DEI, a whole group of them got together and put out some best practices. And given that this is only a half-hour program, I'm not going to work through these for you or unpack them for a 90-minute program. I'd spend a lot of time on this slide. I'd probably have half a dozen or more slides to kind of unpack this and break it down for you. But they talk about recruitment, they talk about access to professional development and training, and they talk about monitoring. And and then they explain what are the things that clearly are legal. Now, one of the things that the Trump administration has done, we got in higher ed a dear colleague letter from the Department of Education, which leaned very heavily on the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard in North Carolina, the case that came down really hard on affirmative action in admissions a couple of years ago from the Supreme Court. And that case is being looked at as guidance for affirmative action beyond higher ed in the areas of private, for-profit and nonprofit organizations and affirmative action for government contractors and so forth. The Trump administration is interpreting that as hard over against affirmative action that possibly can. What this set of best practices is doing is trying to indicate what are practices that even under that new Supreme Court decision, even under the executive orders, which we can look at and say, okay, these may be regulations someday, these may even be changes in the statute, things that are probably going to be acceptable. And I attended a webinar myself last week, put on by half a dozen partners and associate attorneys from the national law firm of Coase and O'Connor, which happens to be one of the half a dozen or so major national law firms that are headquartered here in Philadelphia. And what the partners in that webinar emphasized is the difference between inclusion and exclusion. So if you have programs, you don't, and a rose by any other name is going to smell as sweet. If you have programs that are basically DEI sort of programs, but the emphasis is on the I, on inclusion, and you can call them whatever you want. You can have goals for your organization, for your company, as to what kind of, as to having a diverse workforce. You can have, you can include a minority finalist, and as long as you're not excluding qualified people who are non-minority. You can have mentoring programs. You can do wide-ranging recruiting, throwing your net as wide as possible. What you don't want to do, because it probably is going to be found to be illegal by the Supreme and the lower courts, is have plus factors, where if you are in a particular category, you get extra points for being a person of color, for being an African American, for being a Hispanic, or what have you. That's going to get you into trouble. In terms of the training that you do at your company, critical race training, which I kind of characterize, I hope I didn't offend anyone, but this notion is almost like the communists of re-education, of doing the mea culpa. Okay, now I see why, as a white individual, I have been wrong all these years. That kind of training, it started really pretty much in Florida under DeSantis, passing laws against that. And I think it really is reflected in the posture of the Trump administration. Having pipelines running from sources of minority group candidates is probably not going to work out anymore. We used to do that a lot in higher ed and even brag about it in our affirmative action policies, I think it can, I agree with the Cozen O'Connor attorneys that that's probably going to be trouble. And providing incentives to hiring managers to hire individuals from minority groups, again, probably something that's going to get you in trouble. There are probably more examples we could give, but those are some major ideas. And again, the notion of inclusion, when you include everybody. So if you have some kind of an employee support group, you know what we've done, and there are cases in higher ed, Supreme Court cases that guide us in higher ed. You can have an organization that is the young Democrats or the young Republicans or the Christians for against pornography or what have you, and the school can fund them as long as anybody who wants to join is entitled to join. That it doesn't, if you're non-Christian, you can't join my organization. That would be a no-no. Think about that in terms of support groups that you might have at your institution, at your company or your organization. Some open questions: are lactation rooms going to offend the administration's anti-DEI policies? That's a question that one of the partners asked in the webinar I attended. I think not. I don't think, because that goes more to, it's not really a sexual orientation or sexual preference issue, I don't think. Celebrating Black History Month, well, I think actually the White House did celebrate Black History Month this month, if I'm not mistaken. Religious issues, that gets a little bit dicier because the administration and the Supreme Court are hard over in protecting religious rights, including the rights of corporations where they have religious orientations. I don't know how they're going to handle that with respect to DEI. That's going to be a tough one for companies to get their heads around, for courts to get their heads around, for the administration to deal with. EEO1 reports, I don't know whether you're going to have to file one this year. We'll find out from the EEOC, no doubt. So that's what I have to offer. I hope that it's helpful, and I'll try to field any questions, Blake, that anybody might have.
Okay. If we have any Q&A, please put them in the questions and answers, and I will ask Dr. Jim. And if not, this has been a great webinar. Thank you for doing this. I've posted links to the career learning course that Dr. Jim will be doing for us in a couple weeks. And there's 20% off on that. So please do that. We're going to be having these on a regular basis, so stay tuned, and we will send you an email about that. So no questions right now. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, as always, sir. And I appreciate your time. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.